And this is pretty straightforward. Let's say I had f of x is equal to 3x plus 2. The technique that we use is we substitute f of x with y. And the reason why we do that is it's just easier. It's the only reason we do it. Then to actually invert, you switch your x and your y. And then you want to solve for y. So I'm going to subtract 2 from both sides. Divide by 3. And then I'm going to use my inverse function notation instead of the y. And that is f to the minus 1 of x is equal to 1/3 x minus 2/3. So it's a pretty straightforward mechanical process. Now, if you don't want to substitute f of x for y, you don't have to. I suggest that you do. It just makes it easier when you get to the end to make that substitution. Okay? Now, just 1 second here. I want to talk about one-to-one functions. Functions that we know of are defined such because every element in the domain goes to one element in the range. So for every input, there's exactly one output, no more, no less. If we have a function that is one-to-one, it also means that for every element in the range, it maps to exactly one element in the domain. So it works both ways. The way that it looks like on a graph is if I have a line here, and let's say I take an element in my domain right here, that maps to one element in my range. Or this element in my domain maps to one element in my range. Like this. But it also works the other way too. Like if I pick any element in my range, that maps back to my domain. So I'm going this way now. Okay, you with me on that? An example where it doesn't work would be a parabola. Here, this is still a function. Passes the vertical line test, right? That we all know and love. You pick an element here in the domain, maps to one element on the range. But if we switch it around, and let's say we take an element in the range, that maps to two elements in my domain. So this is not one-to-one. There's a very simple test for it. We know functions pass the vertical line test. Domains pass both the vertical and horizontal line test. So knowing that, it's pretty easy to say something like this. Sure, that's one-to-one. It passes my vertical line test and my horizontal line test. Something like this, big fat no, does not pass the vertical line test. So it's not one-to-one, okay? Traditionally though, we would really like it if we had f of x equals x squared, which looks like our parabola. We traditionally think of the inverse of squaring being the square root. It looks like that. When you reflect a graph over the line y equals x, and I talk about this in my video, you're going to get the inverted function. But if we invert this, we get 2/2 of that parabola. What we really want to do is only get one of them. So what we do is we restrict the domain. And by restricting the domain, we can get just part of it, okay? It's the reason why we don't take the square root of negative numbers, but it's also the reason why if you take the square root of a number, you never get a negative answer, okay?